What's up, guys? Today we are reacting on America versus the world. What if America went to war against the world? We are not hoping for this. We hope this never happens. But what if it happens? What if someday America say, "Hey, you know, let's find out what would happen if I fight all of you again around the world?" And let's see if they can pull that off. Okay. And don't forget, if you do like the video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and comment anything I said wrong. I'm just a guy who doesn't know much about the military, but I do love them. I love the American military. I love responsible militaries around the world. So, just African dude reacting. If you do like, subscribe. I will love it. And let's get into it. I'm talking too much already. I also want to find out, because who doesn't want to find out?
A superpower can be defined as a state with the ability to project power or exert influence on a global scale, usually in more than one region at a time. The United States has been the world's sole superpower since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, holding an unrivaled degree of economic and military dominance around the globe. Even today, with the rise of China, the US still remains by far the most powerful country, still far outstripping competitors in national power. It still has 3 times China's wealth and
3 times China's worth. I know their GDP is not twice China's own, but how possible they have twice China's worth? Let's go find out. I know. I'm just being
5 times its military capabilities. And that's not to mention its enormous advantages in geography, demographics, and more. All things considered, it doesn't seem likely that the US is losing its status as global hegemon anytime soon. But hypothetically, what would happen if America found itself in a conflict against the entire rest of the world? Would the country still have the power to achieve victory, or would it be worn down and defeated? Today, we'll take a closer look at these questions with a USA versus the world wargame. First, it goes without saying that such a scenario is extremely unlikely, if not downright impossible, during our lifetimes. Because of its diplomatic and economic ties around the world, as well as its huge...
This is a hypothetical situation, and we hope we never get to find out, because we'll definitely be cooked if we have to find out. Okay, now, we should not find out. We are here finding out, and that's enough.
Nuclear weapons, the US has almost entirely removed the possibility of real war with Europe and many other countries. But playing out the remote possibility still shows us a lot about US power and how it might look in the coming years. For the purpose of this video, we'll exclude nuclear weapons and assume that such a conflict would break out after a period of heightened global tensions rather than as a surprise attack. So who would really matter? The biggest challenges to the US in terms of actual military capability would certainly be China. Western European nations would be a close second, as they are wealthy and have stockpiles of advanced weapons and technology. While Russia, once considered to be America's main military challenger, its invasion of Ukraine has made clear that the country is something of a paper tiger.
What? Paper tiger? Bro, I know Russia is not really that strong, but I don't know if there's a paper tiger, because those guys are really strong. Russia is a powerful country. No, I know they cannot beat Ukraine, but that's too strong. Okay.
Especially if its nuclear stockpile is out of the equation. India is another potential player, with the world's largest population and substantial...
I do love this India of a country. I don't know, there's just something about India, There's just this thing about India that everybody seems to like, It's just a nice country. But apart from that, let's go.
Military hardware. Together, China, Russia, India, and Europe account for the majority of the world's military spending outside of the US. In our hypothetical, let's say these countries all align against the US, with the rest of the world primarily contributing materiel or financial support. While this is extremely simplified, The fact of the matter is that most countries do not have the resources to project power beyond their borders or immediate region, making an attack on the US impossible. So let's say war breaks out. The first major difficulty with a global offensive against the US would be geographic. Surrounded by water on two sides, and Mexico and Canada to the north and south, any physical attack against the US would face major challenges. First, it would mean mounting either an enormous amphibious assault from one of the coasts, or attempting to invade via land. But the deserts in the southwest and the Great Lakes in the Midwest insulate the country's major population centers from a potential invasion staged from Canada and Mexico. An invasion from outside North America would require massive fronts and long supply chains across the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans, leading to a dramatic reduction of overall power projection. Military expert Dylan Lurk has noted that even the largest amphibious assault in history on either the west coast or the east coast would be too insignificant to acquire an effective beachhead. If every foreign power managed to coordinate such a massive operation, and do so while remaining undetected under the enormous reach and power of the American intelligence apparatus, it would still have issues building up a force of any significant size before being pushed back into the sea. In addition, the strategic Hawaiian island chain acts as a gateway to the US mainland for attacks from the Pacific and is protected by a significant military presence. Similarly, military installations in Alaska provide protection against any invasion from along the Arctic or Northwest.
These guys are basically protected by God. You know, it's like God just said, hey, America, stay there. I'm going to put your enemies that way. Okay. Your enemies would have enemies, and you're going to stay here and you have only friends. Yeah, that's luck.
An attack from Mexico would probably be more feasible due to the Great Lakes blocking much of the Canadian border. But California and Texas have the largest concentration of defense industries and military bases in the country, thus providing an effective deterrent from any attack. With the southwestern desert spanning the two regions, the Southwest is also home to multiple heavily armed military bases, such as the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico or NORAD headquarters in Colorado. An attack launched from Canada on the Midwest or the West would be limited to light infantry and would likely fail to take over population centers or other important strategic points, since there is mostly rural farmland and unpopulated national parks along the border, along with air bases located hundreds of miles south. Dr. Beckley makes this point as well, stating that the United States—
Damn, like, this guy, the narrator, really knows what the hell he's talking about. It's so cool what he's doing, bro. And then just look at Canada. I don't know why Canada would best. Canada is just, well, the cousin of America, or like their junior brother, who is actually bigger than them by size, but not by strength or economy and population. They're way smaller in that regard. But Canadians are basically Americans in some other form. Latin Americans, like Mexicans. Mexicans are just, no, Mexicans are not Latin Americans, but you know, their biggest trading partner, America. So why would you go to war against your biggest trading partner? That means you basically want to destroy your economy. And nobody wants to do that.
Is a natural economic hub and military fortress. It's packed with resources and has more economic arteries like navigable waterways and ports than the rest of the world combined. And even if the US military was unable to stop an invasion, the huge diversity of terrain would also provide US military personnel or militias with the ability to conduct guerrilla warfare. The US is also by far the most heavily armed civilian population in the world, with a staggering 120 guns for every 100 people.
What? 120 guns for 100 people. That means if you have 100 people, you will have 120 guns available for them. If you have 1,000 people, you have 1,200 guns. So you have 1,000 people and extra 200 guns. If you have 10,000 people, you have 10,000 people with extra 2,000 guns. And a million with extra 200,000 guns. Okay. That is to say, if you F around, you will find in, not find out.
This means that even if a coalition of other countries was able to actually get troops into the US, it would end up facing an incredibly well-armed and pissed-off insurgency.
Not in, they will find every street would be popping up with bullets. Okay, if you invaded the USA with this information I just got, no, you had gone back. You had better gone back and apologize to whoever gave you the idea, because how come you could walk down a street and almost every household has a gun to shoot at you? Even if your magazine is full, you definitely be done by the time you have to walk through a whole street, because everybody is popping at you, bro. No, it's a bad idea. But well, let's continue with the hypothetical situation.
On the other hand, over the past 80 years, the US has developed a worldwide infrastructure of military bases, supply lines, and the world's largest air and naval transport fleets. This contains hundreds of ships and aircraft, more than the entire fleet of most countries. The lack of global mobility would be an enormous issue for any coalition facing the US. In the weeks before the sort of global conflict in our hypothetical, the US would most likely pull its forces out of the most vulnerable, non-American bases in Europe, Asia, and the Pacific, concentrating its resources in places where the US exercises greater territorial control to act as staging areas. Some areas would be considered too important to abandon, especially those supporting the military's supply chain, US oil assets, and key territorial choke points. One of the first battlefields in any conflict between the US and the rest of the world would be the Middle East. Here, one major aim of the DoD, as carried out by US Central Command, would be to secure critical US oil refineries and distribution centers, as well as gain control of the sea lanes used for transporting oil out of the region. As of 2022, 80.4% of the world's oil reserves are located in countries belonging to the international oil cartel OPEC, and
that's some real power there. 80%. Yeah, that's some real influence. They say never stand between America and an oil field. You will get smoked. Okay. So if it breaks out, you better get the hell out of that area, because you're going to get smoked if you dare try to stop this guy.
67.1% of OPEC reserves are in the Middle East. Similarly, over 60% of the world's oil passes through shipping lanes in the Arabian Sea alone. While the US has reduced its presence in the region in recent years, a global conflict would almost certainly cause a reorientation. Possessing the world's 12th largest oil reserves means that the US could theoretically go self-sufficient in wartime, but control of some Middle Eastern reserves would make guaranteeing its supply much easier. Similarly, it would allow the US to deny oil to much of the rest of the world, and undermine the coalition's economies and military production. Europe, which would represent the US's most significant adversary, receives a significant amount of its crude oil and natural gas from the Middle East. This means that US military control of the region would harm Europe's ability to sustain a war effort for any extended period of time. China would face a similar issue, as over half of all its oil comes from the Middle East, making the region among one of the most likely fronts in a global war with the US. At the start of the conflict, the US would first strike at oil-related facilities across the Middle East, using carrier-based strike aircraft plus medium and long-range ballistic missiles. US power projection means that even without bases in Afghanistan, the military could easily hit targets anywhere from the Mediterranean to the Strait of Hormuz. While
I don't know how far it is to travel from the USA to this area. I know it's thousands of kilometers. And they just hear that they just carry out airstrikes around the world like it is in their backyard. I didn't think that it's going to be this close, but to me, I'm beginning to see that if America goes to war against the world, they might not have a chance. Well, let's find out. We don't know.
Regional powers could offer some resistance. None of them have anywhere close to the manpower or firepower needed to stop the US in an all-out war. While Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and several others do have modern fighter jets and other weaponry, even they would not last very long up against.
Oh, my laptop is getting discharged. I'll plug it on charge and get right back. Okay. Oh, okay, let's go.
The might of the DoD, and because each is an independent country, intelligence and resource sharing among them would also be limited, further reducing the region's ability to stand up to the US in a shooting war. Most of their assets' signals would also likely be jammed by America's powerful electronic warfare capabilities, which would disrupt enemy communications, targeting.
What is this jamming thing? Like, how do they jam? Like, jam?
And guidance systems across the region. The greatest threat to US control of the Middle East in our scenario comes from ground-based air defenses, as even older systems can shoot unsuspecting fighter jets from the sky. However, unlike Russia's recent experience in Ukraine, the US has actually proven that it can effectively destroy another nation's air defense network, as it did during Desert Storm in the 1990s. Today, this might be even easier due to the enormous arsenal of drones the US has access to. Most US losses in the air would likely come from such drones, as well as fourth-generation jets like the F-15, while its more modern F-18s and F-22s could evade all but the best air defense.
I always like seeing these jets fly. Like, I wish someday I could fly a jet, bro. Like, I wish I could.
Defense systems. After establishing air superiority, the US would then work to control all choke points into and out of the region, especially the easily blocked Suez Canal, where over 12% of global trade passes through. If it was able to effectively keep regional control over the Middle East and its resources, the US would have a decent shot at winning against the rest of the world. A second major battlefield would be the Pacific, where the US would probably use its fleet to keep China and other East Asian nations contained and stop them from attacking the West Coast. This could mean either a blockade of major trade and supply routes, as well as using islands like Hawaii and Guam to stage its own offensives. It would also utilize its fleet of aircraft carriers heavily in the Asia-Pacific region. As of this video, there are 47 aircraft carriers around the world. The largest 11 of these are all nuclear-powered carriers belonging to the US, which have more than twice the combined total deck space of every other country combined. The Pacific Fleet fields 7 of these, and in a global war could use them to deny access to anything approaching the US mainland. Again, oil would be another top concern, and the US could use its massive navy to gain control of the Strait of Malacca, which carries up to 40% of the world's trade every year. While less easily choked off than the Suez Canal, a US blockade of this waterway would also devastate most economies in Asia, giving the US serious economic leverage over China, India, and others. The US would also likely exert its naval power in the.
Everything we have heard is what America could potentially do. Okay, let's know if they can do it. Like, what are the odds that they can, or what are the resources they have to carry out this? Okay.
South China Sea, which it could use to launch strikes against China, Japan, the Philippines, or any other regional power, Heavy fighting would ensue across the sea and air domains all around the South China Sea, and could account for the heaviest US casualties in any theater of this hypothetical war. Another potential target is Taiwan, where over 90% of the world's advanced microchips are currently fabricated. The US might even need to seize and try to occupy the island to stop the global coalition from dominating the production of modern electronics. To do so, the US would inevitably have to challenge China as well. Chinese air defenses and ballistic missile capabilities are already powerful alone, and if combined with the assets of every other country in the region, could potentially pose a problem for the US. The naval base on Guam would be especially vulnerable to strikes by ballistic missiles, which could overwhelm its limited air defenses. Even so, the US Navy is so powerful that every country in the East Pacific combined would be occupied with fending it off, and probably could not launch their own strikes on the US mainland. And because the US Navy is larger than those of the next 8 countries combined, it could easily fight into
What? Those are the next 8 countries combined. These guys, they're always 50 steps ahead of everybody. Like, they want to be there and everybody else is here. Yeah. They don't want to be like, somebody should be half of me. He wants everybody else should be less than me combined.
2 or 3 theaters at once, making simultaneous blockades of Europe, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific a real possibility. Another aspect of a global war would involve submarines.
I love that. The submarines are they're always looking scary, like just one dark, scary machine, just on the sea. Then suddenly it goes beneath the wave, and only thing you see is surface results. When you F around like a surface boat or submarine or on land, you're going to find out. I love submarines. They are so complicated to build.
Which unsurprisingly the US has more of than almost anyone else. Its fleet contains 53 fast attack submarines, 14 nuclear-capable ballistic missile subs, and 4 guided missile subs. Even without using the world-ending nuclear capabilities of an Ohio-class submarine, this massive fleet would allow the US to launch stealth attacks on enemy naval vessels anywhere in the world, completely undetected. While America would be far more hard-pressed to fend off a global coalition on the ground, at sea, the US stands a much better chance of victory. A third global area of battle would be the
No, the guys stand a better chance of victory at sea. I didn't know that. I thought, I thought if they try in the sea, they might get overwhelmed. But see, those guys are good everywhere.
Americas, where the US would have the greatest ability to marshal forces and project power. And because Mexico, Canada, and other countries in the region are far less powerful, there is a good chance the US could blockade, control, or destroy the majority of their military and economic resources. Canada and Venezuela are both obvious targets because of their status as oil producers, and in a global war the US would probably aim to shut down or take control of resources in both. Another obvious target is the Panama Canal, which serves as the gateway between the Atlantic and Pacific, and where 40% of all US container shipping flows through. The US controlled the canal from 1903 to 1979, and would try to seize it again during a global war. This would also provide a choke point against the militaries of Central and South America. Chile is another potential target as the country supplies 28% of the world's copper, critical for the production of modern electronics. Now, obviously, a hypothetical alliance of every other country in the world would have the numerical advantage in overall troops and economic resources. But keep in mind that as of 2022, US military spending was $877 billion, constituting 40%.
$877 billion. Interesting job there.
Percent of the global total and more than the next 10 countries combined. Today, this enormous sum still only accounts for about 3% of the country's GDP. In a global war, this percentage would almost certainly increase and could rise to similar levels as World War II, when US military spending accounted for over 40% of national GDP. Today, that would mean somewhere close to $10 trillion a year.
$10 trillion. That's twice the GDP of Germany, bro. $10 trillion. Let's keep going.
In military spending from the US alone, nearly 5 times the global total from 2022. Astronomical numbers like these mean that a war of attrition against America would also be likely to fail, as the country could outspend the rest of the world several times over for many years. To gain a true strategic edge over the US, a global coalition would have to somehow outgun and outspend the Defense Department, while also maintaining their own smaller economies. Another crucial domain in a global conflict with the US would play out in cyberspace. This would probably be the first line of contact between the warring parties, as both sides would attempt to gain information superiority and take each other's systems offline. While US Cyber Command would almost certainly be overwhelmed with attacks by many actors at once, America could also use its own highly effective attacks to shut down enemy power grids, computer networks, weapons, electronics, and much more. And while it's not as dominant in cyberspace as in the real world, the US still has by far the most capable and best-funded capabilities in the world. In the 2024 fiscal year, US cyber spending will rise to more than $25 billion, and the country can
Just their cyber spending $25 billion. $25 billion, fam. That's huge.
continues to top every ranking of national cyber power. However, this domain would also be one of the biggest dangers to the US in a global war, as cyber attacks are notoriously difficult to predict and defend against. A well-placed cyber attack by a less powerful nation could still be catastrophic, and would probably be a more serious immediate threat to US citizens than a kinetic strike on the country. However, again, we have no way of knowing how much American cyber spending would increase in a total war, or how quickly that would lead to new capabilities. All the elements point to a big conclusion. The US is so powerful that it could take on the rest of the world for weeks or months with no certain winner. Because of this, such a hypothetical conflict would likely become a war of attrition in both the physical and digital worlds. The US would work to starve the world's other major powers of oil, war supplies, and other vital resources, while attempting to preserve its own. A true assault on the US mainland would be extremely difficult because of the country's size, geographic positioning, and incredibly well-armed military and civilian population. Because of the US military's global presence, most of the fighting would likely happen elsewhere, opening theaters of war everywhere from the Middle East to South America and East Asia. In the end, the victor would almost certainly be whichever side could outlast the other, both in terms of military and economic resources. While the scenario of America versus the entire world is obviously an absurd one, it does give us a useful picture of just how powerful the US military really is. With resources greater than those of most individual countries and nearly limitless power projection, even a conventional conflict against the US would be very, very hard to achieve true victory. Add in the country's continued dominance in cyberspace, and it's not all clear whether the rest of the world would actually be able to win such a war. And all of the speculation above excludes the most powerful part of the equation: nuclear weapons.
And so we can stop it there, but like, it's clear that it's not easy for the whole world to beat the USA, if at all they can. Okay, it is almost possible that the US can beat the entire world. I mean, if it happen and we fight against the USA, I'll definitely know that I have like the lowest odds of winning. Yeah, okay, because Take it from me, these guys are tough fighters. Subscribe if you like the video and leave comments and like. See y'all later. Oh.